The smell of a hospital at 2 in the morning is something no amount of time ever truly washes out of your memory. It isn't the sharp, antiseptic bite of bleach that sticks with you, it's the thing underneath it. The warm, copper-edged weight of human suffering that the cleaning crews can never quite reach, no matter how hard they scrub the floors. Maya Voss had been breathing it in for 3 years inside the walls of Hargrove Memorial Medical Center, and she had stopped noticing it approximately 2 years and 11 months ago. She stood at the end of hallway C, holding a laminated patient chart against her chest and staring at the wall clock above the supply closet door. 2:17 a.m. 2 more hours before her shift ended. She looked back down at the chart without urgency. Room 118. Gerald Fontaine. 71 years old. Congestive heart failure, poorly controlled. His oxygen saturation had dipped to 91% during the last check. She had already adjusted his nasal cannula flow rate, repositioned him onto his left side, and left a note for the attending physician, Dr. Raymond Holt, suggesting a mild diuretic push to ease the fluid load on his lungs. Dr. Holt had not responded to the note. Dr. Holt rarely responded to anything Maya Voss suggested. She tucked the chart under her arm and walked down the hallway, her rubber-soled shoes making the barest whisper against the linoleum. She didn't shuffle, she didn't drag. She moved with the deliberate, quiet economy of someone who had learned long ago that the distance between you and a threat is measured not in feet, but in seconds, and that unnecessary noise is the first thing that kills you. But she had learned to soften it here, to make herself look tired, a little slow. She had been softening it for 3 years. The night nursing station was a small island of harsh fluorescent light in the middle of the ward's sleeping dimness. 3 other nurses occupied the space, Terry charting with both elbows on the counter and eyelids losing the fight. James, a 24-year-old, who spent most of his downtime watching sports highlights on his phone, and Portia, the senior night nurse currently on the phone managing a bed dispute with the oncology floor. None of them looked up when Maya set Mr. Fontaine's chart into the return slot. She pulled her stool out and sat down, opened her own charting terminal, began to type slowly enough to look like she was thinking hard about it. She wasn't. The words came automatically. Her mind was somewhere else entirely, running the quiet background process she had never quite been able to shut down, cataloging the sounds of the ward. The muffled cough from room 125, the distant rumble of a supply cart near the elevator bank. The way the ventilation system hummed at a slightly different pitch near the east wall, suggesting a filter that needed replacing. She was exactly 2 lines into her charting notes when Dr. Raymond Holt appeared at the end of the corridor. He had a way of entering a space that Maya had catalogued on her second shift at Hargrove. He didn't walk. He arrived. His 6-foot frame moved with the chest-forward posture of a man who had never once in his adult life been required to make room for someone else. He was 53 years old, with silver temples and the kind of jaw that had been designed by committee to project authority. His white coat was pressed. His stethoscope was draped around his neck with the practiced carelessness of someone who wanted you to know it was there. Holt was the emergency department director. 11 years at Hargrove. A wall of plaques in his office, a habit of referencing them in conversations where they weren't relevant. Voss. He didn't call out. The words simply arrived ahead of him. Maya looked up from her terminal. Dr. Holt. I saw your note about Fontaine. He reached the counter and placed both hands on it, leaning slightly forward. His aftershave was expensive and applied generously. You adjusted his flow rate without physician authorization. His SAT dropped to 91, Maya said. Her voice was the same pitch it always was at this hour. Even, unhurried, carrying no particular emotional signature. I brought it back to 95 with a 2-liter increase. The no was a courtesy, letting you know what I'd done. Holt tilted his head. He used that gesture when he wanted to convey patience with someone who was trying his. We have protocols, Maya. The protocol for dropping saturation in a CHF patient at 2 in the morning is to make the adjustment and notify the physician. That's what I did. Holt straightened up. He looked at her for a moment with the flat, considering expression of a man deciding whether a situation required measured authority or blunt force. He had been deploying both on Maya Voss for 3 years, and neither had produced what he wanted, the specific, reflexive deference that the other nurses gave him without even thinking. Maya Voss never looked nervous. This fact irritated Raymond Holt at a frequency so consistent it had become structural, like a low-grade toothache he'd stopped consciously registering. "I want to discuss your documentation habits," he said. "You have a pattern of adding unsolicited clinical observations to patient charts that blur the scope of nursing practice." "I document what I observe." "You speculate. You add differential assessments that aren't within your scope." He tapped the counter once. "I need you to confine your charting to nursing observations only. Vital signs, patient comfort, medication administration. That's your lane, Maya. I need you to stay in it." Terry had stopped charting. James had put his phone down. Portia was still on her call, but had turned slightly sideways, listening. Maya looked at Holt for 3 seconds without speaking, not because she was trying to think of what to say. She was deciding how much of herself to show. She ran the calculation quickly. 3 years of careful invisibility. 3 years of being exactly forgettable enough that nobody ran a background check. Nobody called old contacts. Nobody got curious about the gap in her work history, or the particular way she moved, or the faint, old scar that ran from her left wrist to the inside of her elbow, thin as a thread and precisely placed. She showed him nothing. "Understood," Maya said. Holt studied her face for any trace of wounded pride that he could mistake for victory. There was none. There never was. It made something tighten at the back of his throat. Good. He picked up Mr. Kaiden, Fontaine's chart from the return slot, glanced at it, and put it back down. "Keep him at the adjusted flow rate. I'll check on him in the morning." He walked away without saying goodnight. Maya turned back to her terminal and continued typing. The call came at 4:49 a.m., 11 minutes before the end of her shift. She heard it on the radio clipped to Portia's belt, a crackling, compressed burst of police scanner traffic bleeding over the EMS frequency. Mass casualty event. 3-vehicle collision on the I-91 overpass. Multiple criticals, ETAs ranging from 6 to 14 minutes. The night shift scrambled. Portia got on the PA. Terry was pulling crash carts. James was already on the phone with the on-call surgical team. Maya stood up from her stool, stripped off her charting gloves, and moved to the supply cabinet in Bay 1 with the quiet, purposeful calm of someone who had done this in conditions that would reduce most people to paralysis. She pulled a standard prep tray, an advanced airway kit, and the surgical chest seal kit. She checked the chest seal kit twice, noting the brand, confirming the seal diameter. She positioned the bay equipment the way she always did when no one was watching. The crash cart pulled 18 inches closer to the head of the bed, the suction unit angled for left-hand access. The IV pole moved to the 11 o'clock position. Small adjustments. The kind you make when you've worked in spaces where there's no time to reposition anything afterward. Terry appeared at the bay door. "Maya, Dr. Watt." Holt said he needs experienced nurses in bays 1 and 2. He wants you on supply run. Restock the trauma carts from the basement. Maya looked at her. He specifically said. Terry had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "Sorry." Maya left the bay she had just prepared. She took the elevator to the basement. She moved through the supply room with mechanical efficiency, loading a cart with IV bags, tourniquet kits, chest tube sets, fresh gauze. She was precise and fast, even down here. Even alone, she heard the sirens arriving while she was in the elevator on the way back up. When the doors opened, the controlled noise of a functioning emergency department had been replaced by the harder, higher-pitched chaos of one that was at its edges. She pushed the supply cart out and assessed the situation in 4 seconds. Bay 1, male mid-40s, suspected internal abdominal trauma, being managed by Holt and 2 residents. Vitals marginal but stable. Bay 2, female, late 20s, head laceration and potential C-spine injury. Portia had her. Controlled. Bay 3, empty. Not for long. The ambulance bay doors blew open again. 2 paramedics, Martinez and a trainee Maya didn't recognize, were running hard, their gurney at a near jog. The patient was a young man, 19, maybe 20. He was in full spinal precautions, but the precautions almost seemed optimistic, given what Maya could see from 15 feet away. His skin was the color of old concrete. His lips carried the faint purple-gray undertone of oxygen debt. His left arm was wrapped in a field dressing that had already soaked through completely, the white gauze blackened to the elbow. There was a cervical collar in place, but his neck muscles were visibly straining with every breath, cording up in the grotesque, unmistakable pattern of someone working every available respiratory muscle just to move air. Martinez was talking before he reached the bay. 20-year-old male, passenger side, direct pole impact at highway speed. BP was 80/50 in the field, dropped to 60 palp en route. GCS 9 on arrival, 8 now, left arm is gone below the mid-humerus. Tourniquet at 17 minutes post-incident. But it's the chest I'm worried about. Maya had already gloved. She moved to the head of the gurney. Breath sounds? Absent on the right. Completely. Maya pressed 2 fingers to the boy's trachea. It was deviated. Slightly, but unmistakably shifted to the left. Her jaw set. Tension pneumothorax. Right-sided. With tracheal deviation, which meant the pressure had been building for a while. The lung had collapsed and the air kept pumping in with nowhere to go, pushing everything, heart, vessels, airway to the left. If that pressure wasn't relieved in the next few minutes, the boy's heart would compress until it simply couldn't beat anymore. She looked at the trainee paramedic. Get me a 14 gauge from the crash cart. Top drawer, the trainee blinked. The doctor hasn't assessed. Top drawer, Maya said. The same voice she always used, the same pitch. But something in it made the trainee move. She had the angiocath in her gloved hand when Raymond Holt appeared in the doorway of Bay 3. He took in the scene in one sweep. The patient, the equipment, Maya positioned at the boy's right shoulder with the needle already uncapped. What are you doing? Tension pneumo, Maya said. She pressed 2 fingers against the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, feeling for the landmarks. Tracheal deviation. Absent breath sounds right. He has maybe 3 minutes. You are not performing a needle decompression. Holt's voice went immediately to the register he reserved for unambiguous institutional authority. I am the attending physician. Step back. Maya paused for exactly 1 second. She looked at the cardiac monitor, which Martinez had just connected. The heart rate was 140 and climbing. The waveform was beginning to show the narrow, compressed morphology of impending cardiovascular collapse. Dr. Holt, she said. He's going to arrest. Step back, Voss. That is a direct order. She looked at the boy's face. She had seen that face before. Not this specific boy. Not these specific features. But this face. This particular version of a young man deciding, without knowing he was deciding anything, whether he was going to keep living or not. She had seen it in places where there was no doctor, Holt to issue a direct order, and every single time she had made the same choice. She drove the needle in. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, perpendicular to the chest wall. She felt the subtle change in resistance as the bevel cleared the pleura. And then she heard it, a sharp, unmistakable hiss of trapped air escaping through the catheter. The effect was almost immediate. The boy's oxygen saturation, which had been tumbling towards 60%, began to climb. The tracheal deviation began to ease. The heart rate on the monitor ticked down from 140 to 128. Holt grabbed her arm. "You just performed a physician procedure," he said, his voice very controlled, which was more frightening than shouting. "In front of witnesses. In my emergency department." "His pressure is coming up," Martinez said from the other side of the gurney. His voice was flat, but his eyes were on Maya with an expression she recognized. The specific look of someone who had just watched something they would be thinking about for a long time. "Portia," Holt said, not releasing Maya's arm. "Page Hospital Security. I want Ms. Voss removed from this bay immediately. Do not let her touch another patient." The security office was on the ground floor, tucked behind the administrative wing in a space that smelled of old coffee and carpet cleaning fluid. It held 2 security guards, Carl, heavyset, 20 years county sheriff before his knees gave out, and Delgado, younger, working toward his criminal justice degree, taking the job very seriously. Maya sat in a plastic chair against the wall and did not speak. She had been there 11 minutes. She knew because she had looked at the clock when she sat down, and she had been counting. Not because she was anxious, but because it was a habit she hadn't been able to break. She had considered the situation thoroughly in the first 3 minutes and arrived at a clear-eyed acceptance of its likely outcomes. Holt would push for termination. The nursing board referral was possible but not certain. The clinical defense for the decompression was solid, and Martinez's field documentation would support her assessment. She would likely lose her license at this hospital, possibly statewide. She had rebuilt herself before. She could do it again. What she would not do, could not do, regardless of the professional consequences, was stand at the foot of a 20-year-old boy's gurney with a needle in her hand and a direct order in her ear, and watch him die because she was afraid of Raymond Holt. She had been afraid of things that would make Raymond Holt disappear into insignificance so complete that the chair he occupied in her mental landscape would simply cease to exist. She had been afraid in specific body-level ways that required entirely different muscles than the kind of institutional fear Holt traded in. And she had learned over many years in many places that the fear of what you might lose professionally was a luxury emotion. You could only afford it when no one was bleeding. The door to the security office opened. It was not Carl returning, not Holt, not hospital administration. The man who walked in was 50 years old, perhaps 52. He wore civilian clothes, dark khakis, a gray button-down, a coat built for function rather than appearance. He was not particularly tall, not particularly large. He had the kind of face that was almost aggressively unremarkable, the sort that eyes lit off of in a crowd, that security cameras would have difficulty resolving into a clear composite. His hair was dark, silvering at the temples, cut short enough to be tidy without drawing attention. His eyes were the exception. They were pale, gray-green in the fluorescent light, and they moved through the room with a quality of assessment that was, to someone who knew what they were looking at, immediately and completely recognizable. Delgado straightened up. "Sir, this is a restricted." The man reached into his jacket pocket and produced a credential wallet. He held it open at arm's length. Whatever Delgado read on it performed some rapid structural revision of his posture. "I need the room," the man said. His voice was quiet, measured with the particular quality of calm that came not from temperament but from practice. The kind you developed when a raised voice was the thing that got you killed. Carl came back from his phone calls, saw the credential, and said, "Yes, sir," before Maya had time to register that he hadn't been asked a question. Both security guards left. The man in the gray shirt closed the door. He looked at Maya. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The clock on the wall said 5:23 a.m. "I've been in town for 4 days," the man said finally. Maya looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. He raised an eyebrow a fraction of an inch. "You made me." Day 2. Blue Toyota Camry, rental plate, parked twice within sightline of the employee entrance. Not the same parking space, but the same angle. A pause. You're better than that. You've gotten more careful. I've had 3 years of practice being someone who isn't me. She met his eyes. Hello, Warren. Warren Lyle, CIA Station Chief, North Africa Desk, currently detailed to domestic operations oversight, pulled the second plastic chair away from the wall and sat down. He rested his elbows on his knees and assembled his words in a specific order. There's a situation, he said. There's always a situation. This one is yours. Maya waited. 6 weeks ago, a deep cover asset in the Maghreb network sent an emergency signal. 48 hours later, before we could extract him, he was taken. He has been held for 43 days. He paused. He was carrying a modified toxin compound, aerosolized, two-stage delivery mechanism. Our technical people believe the compound has already been transferred to a secondary party. We don't know where it's going. We don't know where it's going. What we do know is that the synthesis process left a specific biological signature, a cellular marker in the tissue of anyone who handled the compound without proper shielding during production. Maya's eyes did not move from his face. The secondary party made contact with a U.S. diplomatic representative at a consulate function in Brussels 2 days ago. The rep flagged it. The flag came up the chain to my desk this morning. He reached into his coat and produced a small, sealed evidence bag containing a single swab. Tissue sample. Handshake contact point. We believe trace transfer occurred, and you need the sample analyzed. I need it analyzed by someone who understands the compound's biological signature, someone who helped develop the methodology for identifying it. He looked at her. That's you. Maya looked at the evidence bag. It was such a small, ordinary-looking thing. A sterile swab in a Ziploc pouch, the kind used in 1,000 standard medical procedures every day, the kind of object that, when held by the right person in the right context, carried the weight of everything. I work in a hospital, Maya said. You used to work for us. I left. The work doesn't leave, Warren said. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of structural fact, the kind that didn't require agreement to be true. The lights in the security office hummed. Outside the door, Maya could hear the distant sounds of the hospital beginning its early morning shift change. A PA announcement, the rumble of a linen cart. The particular acoustic signature of a space that never truly slept. She thought about the 20-year-old boy in Bay 3. The hisses of air escaping the catheter. The way his saturation had ticked upward on the monitor, those small numbers rising like a very slow tide. She thought about Raymond Holt's hand on her arm. She thought about the 3 years she had spent becoming someone with bad posture and slow reflexes and no particular opinions about anything. The careful, patient construction of an ordinary person built over the bones of someone who was not ordinary and had never, regardless of how hard she tried, managed to make herself entirely forget it. She held out her hand. Warren placed the evidence bag in her palm. The lab on the 3rd floor of Hargrove Memorial ran the standard blood panels and urinalysis that kept the hospital functioning. Maya had spent enough overnight hours up here to know the equipment, know the technicians, know that the night shift's second technician went on her meal break at 5:15 every morning and didn't come back for 40 minutes. It was currently 5:29. Maya worked quickly. The tissue sample wasn't going into the hospital's standard analyzer. That would generate documentation she did not want attached to Hargrove Memorial's database. Instead, she used a portable field spectrometer Warren had produced from an interior jacket pocket, the size of a thick paperback book. She had used this exact model before. She ran the swab through the PrEP protocol, buffer wash, enzyme fix, slide mount, and fed the slide into the spectrometer's input port. The device processed for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The results appeared on its small screen in alphanumeric shorthand that would have meant nothing to a clinical chemist, but was immediately legible to Maya. She looked at the numbers for a long time without moving. Then she went back downstairs. Warren was in the hospital's ground-floor family waiting room. At this hour, it held only one other occupant, an elderly man sleeping in a corner chair. Warren was sitting near the window, holding a paper cup of vending machine coffee he wasn't drinking. Maya sat down next to him and handed back the spectrometer. "Positive," she said. "Stage 1 marker, consistent with recent exposure within the last 72 hours. Concentration suggests indirect contact, not production-level exposure." She paused. "The compound isn't complete." Warren looked at her. "The synthesis requires a tertiary stabilization agent. Without it, the aerosolized form degrades in under 12 hours. It's inert. Whoever has it doesn't have a deliverable weapon yet. They need the stabilizer." She kept her voice low, unhurried. "The stabilizer is produced by a very small number of specialized chemical processes. I can tell you which ones. You can. I helped design the restriction protocol around them." She stopped. "When I was still working." Warren set the coffee cup down on the chair beside him. He was quiet for a moment. In the window behind him, the sky over the parking lot was beginning to shift from absolute black to the very dark blue that precedes false dawn. "Maya," he said, "I know what you're going to say. We need you back." She looked to the window, at the dark blue sky and the amber parking lot lights and the ordinary, featureless expanse of a suburban hospital entrance at 5:30 in the morning. She thought about the box she had built, the careful architecture of ordinariness she had maintained for 3 years. She thought about how much of herself she had packed away and how much of it she had secretly, shamefully been relieved to use tonight. First with a needle in Bay 3, then in the lab upstairs, now in this conversation, speaking in a language that was actually hers. "I need 24 hours, she said. Warren nodded once. "And I need something from you first." He waited. "Raymond Holt is going to attempt to have me arrested this morning," Maya said. "He's already involved hospital security. He'll have administration behind him by 8 a.m. He'll push for criminal charges, unauthorized medical procedure, possibly assault. I need that stopped." Warren looked at her for a moment. "Done," he said. "I don't want it handled messily." "It won't be." She believed him. Warren Lyle was many things, and messy was not one of them. She stood up, smoothed the front of her scrub top, looked for a moment entirely like what she had been pretending to be. "I'll be in touch," she said. She walked out through the main entrance into the pre-dawn cold. The automatic doors slid shut behind her. The parking lot was quiet. The surgeon was back. Raymond Holt arrived at his office at 7:45 a.m. with the righteous energy of a man who had spent the previous 2 hours rehearsing a confrontation he was entirely confident he was going to win. He had the documentation in order. He had called in the 2 administrative nurses who witnessed the incident in Bay 3. He had placed a call to his legal counsel, Greer, at 6 a.m. He had drafted a preliminary referral to the state nursing board. Having it ready felt like a properly loaded weapon. He called his administrative assistant, Linda, who had been at Hargrove for 22 years and had outlasted 4 ED directors. "Get me Maya Voss's personnel file, please, and ask security to escort her up." Linda was quiet for a moment. "Dr. Holt." "Linda, Ms. Voss is not currently with security." Holt frowned. "She was detained last night at my request." "Yes, sir. But she was released at approximately 5:45 this morning." Carl indicated that there was he described it as a federal intervention. An individual with government credentials arrived and she was released into that individual's custody. Holt stared at his desk. Federal credentials. That was Carl's description. What kind of federal credentials? He wasn't specific. He seemed somewhat. Linda paused, selecting her word with care. Shaken, Holt put the phone down and went to find Carl. Carl was in the security office filling out an incident report. He was a large man who had spent 2 decades in law enforcement and was not, in Holt's experience, easily rattled. He looked, this morning, as though something had restructured his understanding of the world in a way he was still processing. Walk me through what happened. Carl walked him through it. The man with the credential wallet. The wallet opened to reveal. Carl paused and set down his pen. He described what he saw as a high-level federal law enforcement credential. In person, sitting across from Holt in the morning light, he used different words. He said it was one of those that makes you understand that asking follow-up questions is probably not in your best interest. Did you get a name? No, sir. A badge number? Carl looked at him. Dr. Dim. Holt. When a person presents that kind of credential, the appropriate response is not to ask for the badge number. Holt left the security office. He found that his legal counsel, Greer, was waiting outside his door. This was unusual. Greer was not a person who showed up at other people's offices. Raymond, she said, falling into step beside him. Her voice carried the flat neutrality of someone who had received information requiring a recalibration of their professional stance. We need to talk about Maya Voss. That's exactly what I was planning to do. I received a call at 6:50 a.m. from an attorney I've never spoken to before. He identified himself as federal government counsel. He indicated that any disciplinary action against Maya Voss would be, she paused, his word, inadvisable. He was very specific about the reasons being classified and very specific about the fact that he was making this call as a professional courtesy and that a second call would not be forthcoming. Holt stopped walking. He can't do that. He apparently can. Greer looked at him with the expression of a person who knew when a door was simply closed. I made some inquiries this morning. I reached out to the licensing board. They came back and told me that Ms. Voss's records were flagged with a federal access restriction. Not sealed, flag. The records exist, but accessing them requires clearance we don't have and aren't going to get. So she just what? She just gets away with performing an unauthorized physician procedure on a patient in my emergency department? The patient, Greer said carefully, was a 20-year-old male named Daniel Cruz who presented with a tension pneumothorax and who is currently alive and recovering on the 4th floor. His family was seen by administration this morning. They are not filing a complaint. The silence in the corridor was very loud. Holt straightened his coat. He turned and walked back to his office without another word. He sat down at his desk. He looked at the personnel file Linda had pulled. Maya Voss, 3 years employment, exemplary attendance, no prior disciplinary incidents, a single previous note flagging her for overstepping clinical boundaries in patient charting, a note he himself had written. He looked at the referral to the state nursing board he had drafted this morning. He read it once. He put it through his shredder. Then he sat in his chair for a long time looking at the window, thinking about how there were two kinds of power. The kind you could see and name and reference, and the kind that simply reorganized the room around you without explaining itself. He had spent 20 years building the first kind. He was only now beginning to understand that Maya Voss had never been without the second. Daniel Cruz was in room 412. Maya had not been back since leaving through the main entrance at 5:40 that morning. She had gone home, showered, changed into civilian clothes, and spent 2 hours sitting in her kitchen drinking black coffee and looking at the wall, running through the implications of what Warren had told her. She came back at 9:15. She knocked twice on the doorframe of room 412. The young man in the bed looked better than he had 6 hours ago in the same way that a house fire looks better once it's been put out. The crisis had passed, but the evidence was everywhere. An oxygen cannula in place. Left arm heavily bandaged, elevated on a pillow. His face was the washed-out pale of significant blood loss, but his eyes were open and tracking. They tracked to Maya when she appeared in the doorway. His mother was sitting in the chair beside the bed. 40 or so, with the red-rimmed eyes of someone who had spent the night being terrified and was now coming down from it. "I'm Maya," Maya said. "I'm a nurse here. I was with you last night when you came in." Daniel Cruz looked at her for a moment. "You're the one who put the needle in," he said. His voice was rough. "Yes." He nodded slowly. "Paramedic told me. Said it was you." His mother stood up. "You saved his life," she said. Her voice was very level. It sounded like it was costing her something to keep it that way. Maya looked at her. "He saved his own life. He made it to the hospital. You know what I mean." "I know what you mean," Maya agreed. She stayed for 7 minutes. She checked Daniel's oxygen saturation on the bedside monitor, not because it was her floor or her patient. It wasn't, technically, but because the habit was deep and she couldn't not. The saturation was 97%. His heart rate was 68. She told him what those numbers meant in plain language because no one had explained them to him yet, and because understanding what your body is doing while it recovers is not a small thing. When she left room 412, she took the elevator down. In the main lobby, she pushed through the revolving door and stood for a moment on the concrete steps in the cool late morning air. Warren was leaning against a black SUV in the visitor loading zone, his hands in his coat pockets. He looked at her. "Ready," he said. Maya looked back at the hospital. At the glass face of the building, the automatic doors, the ordinary institutional facade of a place where extraordinary things happened every night in the spaces between heartbeats. In the 20 seconds it took for a 19-gauge needle to change the direction of a young man's life. She had spent 3 years here. She had been good at it, the smaller version, the civilian version, the version that didn't require her to be fully herself. She had been careful and competent and quiet, and she had done real work, and none of that was nothing. But the box was packed. The lid was open, and something was on its way toward a public place, and the only person who fully understood the biological signature of what it carried was standing on these concrete steps. "I need to go upstairs first," Maya said. Warren looked at her. "I have to hand off my patients properly," she said. "I'm not leaving without doing that." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise exactly. More like recognition. "I'll be here," Warren said. Maya went back inside. She took the elevator to the nursing floor. She sat down at a terminal, opened her charts, and spent the next 22 minutes documenting every patient she had been responsible for. Vitals, assessments, care notes, pending actions, red flags, follow-up suggestions. She flagged Mr. Deere Fontaine's chart with a note requesting the diuretic adjustment she had recommended the night before, this time written in terms that would make it very difficult for whoever read it to ignore. She signed each chart with her full name, methodical, complete. Then she logged out, walked to the locker room, retrieved her bag from her locker, and left the building. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday morning, a package arrived at Hargrove Memorial Medical Center addressed to the Nursing Administration Office. No return address. Inside was a standard personnel file jacket with Maya Voss's name on the tab. Clipped to the front was a single sheet of paper, not on any official letterhead. 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph stated that the separation of the above-named employee from Hargrove Memorial Medical Center was effective immediately and voluntary in nature. No adverse employment action had been initiated or sustained. The second paragraph stated that the above-named employee's nursing license was valid, current, and in full standing with the state board, and that any referral or documentation suggesting otherwise would be found to be unsupported by the record. The third paragraph was addressed to the Director of Emergency Medicine, Dr. Raymond Holt by name. It stated simply the needle decompression was correctly indicated. The outcome was the correct outcome. Your institutional authority does not override the physiology of a tension pneumothorax. The above-named employee was right. You were wrong. There was no signature. Raymond Holt read it in his office with the door closed. He sat with it for a long time. He looked at the plaques on his wall. He put the letter through his shredder. Then he sat in the quiet office with the shredder's hum fading into the ambient sound of the hospital around him. And for the first time in a very long time, Raymond Holt felt something that was not quite fear and not quite awe, but lived precisely in the complicated territory between them. He picked up his phone. Linda, he said. Yes, Dr. Holt. Pull the protocol file for nursing scope of practice intention pneumothorax presentations. I want to review it. A pause. All of it. All of it, he said. He set the phone down and turned to his computer. And for the first time in 11 years as Emergency Department Director of Hargrove Memorial Medical Center, Raymond Holt began to revise something he had previously settled. Somewhere 40 minutes outside the city, in a building that looked like a regional insurance company office, a woman with a thin scar on her left wrist and very steady hands was working through a folder of chemical transport manifests, annotating them in a precise, rapid hand that moved with the same economy of motion she brought to everything. She was not in a hospital, but she was, in every way that mattered, still doing the work. She turned a page. She kept going.